Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. The doorbell rang just as I was flipping pancakes. Saturday morning, kids yelling, coffee half sipped. I opened the door to find a courier holding an envelope marked urgent legal notice. By sunset, I'd be fighting a war over my land, with law books, drone footage, and pure vengeance. I was elbow deep in pancake batter when the doorbell rang. It was one of those crisp Minnesota mornings where the frost clings to the kitchen windows and the coffee tastes like a reward. I was halfway through flipping breakfast for my kids, Saturday tradition, when the bell hit again, this time with the kind of urgency that made me think someone was selling religion or demanding signatures for a cause I didn't believe in. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, muttered something about the Lord better be holding coffee, and opened the door to find a young courier in a gray windbreaker holding out a thick envelope marked with red ink, URGENTLEGALNOTICE. Mr. Harper, he asked. Unfortunately, I said, signing for the envelope. The guy turned and left like he didn't want to be around when the contents exploded. I closed the door, tossed the towel over my shoulder, and ripped the seal with the precision of someone who's opened too many court orders in his life. What I read made me sit down hard on the bench in the entryway. Notice of sale and termination of possessory rights pursuant to delinquent dues and covenantal breach, Crystal Shores Homeowners Association. They were claiming to have sold my land. The words blurred for a second. I blinked hard and kept reading. According to the notice, 1,650 acres of my land, including the wooded areas, fields, and the small lake, had been seized by Crystal Shores HOA due to non-payment of annual dues and failure to adhere to community upkeep requirements. It went on to list a breakdown of fines for overgrown brush, wildlife hazards, and unauthorized non-HOA approved structures, which I assumed meant the 100-year-old barn my great-grandfather built by hand. I laughed, a short involuntary laugh that didn't feel good in my chest, because here's the thing, I'm not part of Crystal Shores, never have been. My land borders their little manicured utopia of beige McMansions and ornamental duck ponds, but my property was carved into the county decades before a single blueprint for their community was even drawn. It was legacy land, passed from my grandfather to my father to me, zoned separately, taxed independently, legally outside their jurisdiction. Still, the paperwork was slick. Official stamps, notarized signatures, a record of transfer filed with the county. I stood up and walked to the filing cabinet in my office, flipping through property records until I found the deed. Clean, uncontested, recorded in Hennepin County, with full rights of ownership. My name. No encumbrances. No HOA attachments. Nothing that would justify what I was holding. I stared out the window toward the tree line, a chill creeping up my spine. If this was a joke, it wasn't funny. If it was a mistake, it was a damn elaborate one. And if it wasn't either, well, someone was about to have a very bad day. The kids came into the kitchen, mid-argument about who got the last pancake, and I told them I had to step out for an hour. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the municipal recorder's office. No appointment, no delay. I knew some people there from past real estate work, but this was personal. The clerk at the counter blinked when she saw the notice. Are you saying this was filed yesterday? I asked, voice tight. She nodded slowly, tapping through her screen. Filed electronically through a third-party title management company, Shoreline Title Holdings. Never heard of them, but they're listed as the intermediary between your property and Crystal Shores HOA. They listed my property under their parcel grid. Yes, but only the southern sector of your land, the lake area, and the adjacent woodland. It was carved off digitally in a way that passed initial validation. That's when my stomach sank, because I knew how that worked. I'd seen it done in shady land grabs, exploit an unguarded GIS system, use third-party shell corporations, file a fraudulent transfer in bulk with dozens of legitimate ones, and hope it sails through unnoticed until someone's already building a deck over your soil. I drove back furious, pulled into the gravel driveway just as a white truck with Crystal Shores decals was pulling away from the south trail gate, the trail that led to the lake. Fresh survey flags lined the path. Red tape dangled from the trees like party streamers. There were people on my land. I walked the perimeter, taking photos with my phone. Temporary markers. a laminated sign staked into the ground with the Crystal Shores logo and the words Future Community Park, Private Access Only. I stared at that sign like it had grown there overnight from spite and hubris. And then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Harper, this is Meredith Walker, president of Crystal Shores HOA. I believe you've received the formal notice. We'd like to discuss an amicable exit from the premises. We understand this may be difficult. Change always is. But you've had plenty of time to bring the land up to code. I blinked, stunned. Excuse me. You have zero authority over this land. Now let's not get hostile, she said smoothly. The property was improperly grandfathered and should have been annexed years ago. We're correcting that now. The previous owner was in discussions with us, and we acted in good faith. The previous owner was my father, and he would have rather paved your clubhouse with dynamite than sign a deal with you. Well, he's no longer with us, she said crisply. And the community has moved forward. The sale is final. You have 72 hours to vacate. She hung up. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then threw it onto the passenger seat and drove straight home, already drafting the injunction in my head. I might have been blindsided this morning, but this wasn't over, not even close. The next morning, before the sun had properly risen, I was already seated in my home office, surrounded by stacks of property records, court precedents, and coffee that tasted like battery acid. I hadn't slept. Between Meredith's call and the parade of orange survey flags on my land, my mind had cycled through every form of outrage it knew. But anger doesn't hold up in court. Paper does. I was building an arsenal. I started with the deed. My deed. Issued 17 years ago when my father passed, notarized, recorded, and crystal clear, Parcel B 217, encompassing 1,650 acres, including full water rights to the adjacent lake. There was no annexation clause, no HOA affiliation, no subordination to any community charter. The property existed as its own legal entity, like a private island surrounded by HOA pretension and golf carts. Then came the title history. The chain of ownership read like a family Bible, each generation adding their name, each transfer clean, not a blemish, not a hint of shared authority. I drafted an affidavit attesting to that continuity, then compiled every relevant survey, county tax statement, zoning document, and an aerial map dating back to the 50s showing that our land had never, not once, been included in the Crystal Shores. Master plan. But the real gold mine came from a contact I had at the county GIS office, a guy named Taylor who owed me a favor from a messy boundary dispute I'd helped him settle. I asked him to pull all recent updates involving my parcel. He called back an hour later. Jules, you're gonna love this. The HOA didn't just claim your land. They digitally subdivided it, filed it as multiple microlots, and routed the transfers through a shell title company, Shoreline Title Holdings. It's a Delaware-registered LLC created 3 months ago, and its agent of record is a guy named Barry Lentz. That name hit like a slap. Barry was a bottom feeder I'd gone up against before, a guy who specialized in gray market land flips, operating one step ahead of disbarment, the kind of man who called forged paperwork creative interpretation. Taylor continued. They filed the transfers as part of a bulk lot package. The surrounding parcels are legit HOA land, so your southern sector just got bundled in with the rest. It passed through our system because the metadata matched the HOA's template. Jesus, I muttered. They Trojan horsed my forest. And unless you file a motion to enjoin it today, those markers will be permanent by Monday. I was already on my feet. I called Rhonda Gutierrez, my favorite courthouse clerk, and got a fast-track emergency hearing for that afternoon. Then I emailed the injunction template to my paralegal and told her to get it on file before lunch. If HOA wanted war, they were going to get it, with exhibit binders and certified copies. At 1 p.m., I walked into Hennepin County Court with 3 folders, a USB drive, and enough righteous fury to run on diesel. The opposing side sent a junior associate in a blue blazer 3 sizes too big, sweating through his shirt collar and clutching a manila folder that looked embarrassingly thin. Judge Larkins, a woman I'd once watched eviscerate a mortgage bank over a bad lien, scanned my filing like she was speed reading a grocery receipt. Mr. Harper, she said without looking up, you're asserting full ownership and requesting injunctive relief on the basis of fraudulent conveyance? Yes, Your Honor. And I have supporting documents showing my property was digitally reclassified and resold without consent, notice, or legal authority. She nodded once, then turned to the opposing counsel. Response? The kid stammered. Your Honor, the HOA acted under the assumption there had been historic intent to transition this land into community holdings based on verbal discussions with the prior owner. Judge Larkins raised a hand. Verbal discussions? You're asserting standing based on hearsay? The poor kid wilted. They had survey overlap maps, which they created. Mr. Harper has county maps predating your client's existence. She clicked her pen. Preliminary ruling. Motion granted. Injunction issued. All transactions involving Parcel B 217 and its sublots are frozen pending full review. Any further development activity will be considered unlawful trespass. Mr. Harper, you may submit a formal motion for damages at your discretion. I allowed myself the smallest nod of satisfaction. The HOA had thrown the first punch and missed. As I left the courthouse, I got a text from Taylor. One more thing, found the incorporation address for Shoreline Title. It's a P.O. box behind a Payless shoe source. Typical Barry, I drove straight to my land. Sure enough, the workers were back, measuring the trail like they hadn't just lost a court battle. I stepped out of my truck, pulled the injunction from my glove box, and read it aloud like a sermon. One of them, an older guy with a mustache that could get him cast in a Western, nodded, mumbled something about not being paid enough to get sued, and started packing up. I waited until they were gone before walking down to the lake. The water was still, cold, blue as regret, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I was loading the first round into the chamber, because now I wasn't defending anymore. Now I was planning my next move. I'd barely been home for an hour when Rhonda called again. You're going to want to see this, she said without preamble. Someone just filed a counterclaim on behalf of Crystal Shores HOA. They're demanding that the injunction be lifted on the grounds that your father entered into a legacy integration agreement with their board in 1994. I had to laugh. There was no such thing as a legacy integration agreement in Minnesota property law. It sounded like something a corporate HR team would cook up during a sensitivity workshop. I asked Rhonda to send the filing to my inbox and opened it within seconds. It was garbage. The so-called agreement was a one-page unsigned memo referencing future consideration of potential integration of land resources subject to cooperative benefit. No dates, no letterhead, no signatures. Just lawyer speak and big dreams scribbled on digital air. But the filing did its job. It pissed me off. They were going to play smoke and mirrors. Fine. I'd bring fire. I met up with Rhonda and Taylor at the county archives the next morning. We combed through the history of the land, minute books, zoning board notes, HOA charter expansions, anything with a timestamp. What we found made everything click into place. Crystal Shores had tried to annex part of my land once before. Back in the early 2000s, they'd petitioned the county to redraw zoning boundaries to include undeveloped bordering wilderness into their master plan. The request had been denied twice. There were records of community pushback, public comments, even an old newspaper clipping of my father standing at the town hall podium saying, "If they want a park, let them build one where they already own dirt." I scanned a copy of that article and added it to my growing war file. But here's where things got really interesting. Taylor discovered that the southern lakefront section of my land, roughly 25 acres, had never been formally subdivided. It was legally mine, yes, but because it hadn't been previously platted or built on, it was classified under a flexible use clause. That meant I could, if I wanted, file a subdivision petition myself and sell or lease portions independently without HOA involvement. And right across that boundary line, Crystal Shores' 5 most expensive lakefront mansions. We're talking sprawling architectural behemoths with infinity pools, private docks, and glass walls facing the water I owned. I called my old friend and land use attorney, Rebecca Cross. How fast can we file a controlled subdivision plan on 25 acres of unplatted lakefront? She paused. Are you looking to develop? I'm looking to make some very rich people reconsider the value of ignoring boundary lines. She chuckled. Oh, it's one of those. I'll have something to you by Monday. By the weekend, Rebecca had filed the petition with a corresponding land court application citing the quarter section doctrine, an obscure Minnesota precedent allowing direct private segmentation of undeveloped land bordering water when the adjacent use case is residential. Rare, Old, but fully legal. We split the lakefront into 5 rectangular parcels, each of them butting directly into the lots owned by the Crystal Shores elite. I transferred ownership of those slices to a holding company I controlled, Blue Ridge Consolidated Assets, and gave them slick, marketable names: Lakeview North, East Point Bend, Silver Cove 1, 2, and 3. Then I listed them for sale. Not on the open MLS. Not on Zillow. I sent out private offering memorandums to select buyers in my professional network: investors, developers, people with money, and very little patience for community drama. I framed the offerings as luxury lake-adjacent parcels with exclusive water access, perfect for micro-resorts, event staging, or custom architecture. Interest came fast. The first serious offer came from a tech startup looking to build a private wellness retreat. Another came from a wine distributor who wanted to set up a tasting pavilion with dockside service. A third wanted to build a floating sauna. I hadn't even accepted any of the offers yet. I was just letting them swirl, but I made sure the board of Crystal Shores saw every listing. I mailed one to their HOA office, printed in color, bound, annotated, with a sticky note on the cover that said, "If you liked playing real estate games, you're going to love mine." The reaction was immediate. By Monday morning, I had a cease and desist letter on my desk filled with dramatic language about irreparable community harm and the sacred preservation of shoreline aesthetics. It was signed by Meredith Walker herself. I framed it. Then I went back to Blue Ridge's inbox and told the investors, "Let's move forward." It didn't take long before the screaming started. Not literal screaming, though that would come later, but the kind that showed up in legal threats, backdoor phone calls, and the unmistakable sound of panic that rich people make when their sense of invincibility begins to crack. By the end of the week, 3 homeowners from Crystal Shores had each sent me personal letters, some polite, some not, asking to clarify the nature of the land sales I was conducting along the lake. Clarify? Sure. Here's the clarification. You built your 7-figure mansion next to someone else's shoreline, and that shoreline isn't yours. It's mine. You paved your patio 3 feet past the property line. You installed a floating dock without checking the deeds. And now you're realizing that those red survey flags weren't for show. They were for sale. I wasn't even charging them. Yet. Instead, I filed a public declaration with the county titled Notification of Proposed Private Access Projects for Blue Ridge Parcels. It was a bland-sounding document, deliberately so, but it contained something that lit a fire in the heart of Crystal Shores: permission applications for commercial infrastructure, dock access, noise waivers, and a variance for lakefront music events. Every line was legal, every line was public, and every neighbor who'd once looked smug sipping rosé on their patio was now facing the prospect of a weekend paddleboard yoga festival and an EDM wine party happening 30 feet from their infinity pool. Let's just say the vibe shifted. Meredith Walker didn't call this time. She sent a lawyer, a new one. Not the kid in the oversized blazer, but a tall, polished man in his 40s with a jaw like a brick and the expression of someone who bills by the breath. His name was Richard Halbrook, partner, from a downtown firm with glass walls and espresso machines that probably cost more than my truck. We met in a neutral space, my office above the feed store in town. I offered him coffee. He declined. We skipped the pleasantries. "You've made your point, Mr. Harper," he said, setting his briefcase down. "But let's not pretend this is about property rights. This is retaliation." I smiled. Retaliation implies something was done to me first. Which it was. He tilted his head as if I'd confirmed something. "What's your endgame here? You want to be bought out? You want press? Political capital?" I shrugged. "Maybe I want peace and quiet. That's what I had before your clients decided to redraw the map and sell my forest like it was part of their golf course." He folded his hands. "Here's what I propose. You withdraw the current sales. Cease development. In return, the HOA agrees to cancel any ongoing claims regarding your land's unincorporated alignment, and we offer a one-time settlement payment. $500,000. I leaned back. $500,000 for 25 acres of lakefront property that currently commands up to $4 million per parcel. I whistled, and I'm the one accused of retaliation. "Don't be foolish," he said, voice firming. "You're creating a nightmare. Lawsuits, code compliance headaches, environmental reviews, public nuisance complaints. We can bury you in filings for the next 3 years. I'm a real estate attorney," I said. Burying people in filings is my cardio. The offer expired in 10 minutes. He left with the same tight jaw and a slightly quicker pace. That night, Blue Ridge LLC received 3 formal offers on the subdivided parcels, 2 from outside investors, 1 from someone local. I recognized the LLC name as belonging to a logistics magnate who'd recently bought up event spaces in the region. He wanted to use the eastern shoreline plot for a private launch dock for electric watercraft. I accepted. A week later, his survey crew showed up on site. They wore orange vests, carried drones, and worked with the quiet efficiency of people who build airstrips for billionaires. They didn't talk to the neighbors. They didn't have to. But the neighbors talked plenty. I started getting voicemails. First from homeowners, then from a local news reporter, and then finally from county code enforcement who wanted to verify the legitimacy of multiple minor commercial site preparations occurring in residential buffer zones. So I invited them out. They showed up with clipboards and concerned eyebrows ready to find violations. Instead, they found a fully permitted project, complete with stamped approvals, environmental clearance documents, and signed land use declarations. I offered them coffee. They took it. Later that week, I got a certified letter from Crystal Shores HOA titled Notice of Emergency General Assembly. The topic, Preservation of Community Integrity in Response to External Commercial Encroachment. Translation, Harper's winning, and we don't know what to do about it. They scheduled the meeting for Sunday afternoon in their community clubhouse, the one with white columns and a fountain that never worked. I wasn't invited, but I went anyway. I parked my truck across the street, leaned against the hood, and waited. One by one, board members and residents filtered in, casting glances in my direction like I was the ghost of Christmas eminent domain. Some ignored me. A few nodded stiffly. One man, must have been pushing 70, walked up and said, "You know they're going to try and sue you into submission, right?" "They already are," I said. "It's adorable." He smiled. "Good luck. Some of us think they had this coming." I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't have to. They didn't take the hint. 3 days after the HOA's emergency meeting, I received a thick envelope from Halebrooks' firm. Inside were 96 pages of what amounted to a glossy threat, claims of zoning violations, accusations of environmental disturbance, and a laughable attempt to prove I was creating intentional market destabilization. They threw everything at me. Noise ordinance concerns, wetland proximity, even some nonsense about unauthorized shoreline modifications. I almost wanted to frame it. Instead, I sent it straight to Rebecca. She called within the hour, laughing so hard I could hear her wheezing through the receiver. They used a zoning map from 1992, she said. This isn't even current data. They're arguing from a jurisdiction that hasn't existed since before dial-up internet. We filed a response within 24 hours, a motion to dismiss all claims, paired with a countersuit for harassment, abuse of process, and attempted interference with lawful land development. Rebecca worded it like a hammer. Meanwhile, I made another move, one they didn't see coming. Using Blue Ridge, I began leasing access to parts of the shoreline. Not full sale, just controlled, short-term private access. A film company rented one parcel for a lakeside shoot. A wedding planner rented another for a high-end ceremony with a floating barge stage. For each lease, I required only 3 things: respect the land, stay within bounds, and pay up front. And then the drone footage hit social media. Someone, probably a guest, captured the wedding from above. The pristine white canopy, the mirrored lake, and just beyond it, the backyard of a Crystal Shores mansion with a woman in tennis whites visibly screaming into her phone. The clip went viral. Not millions of views viral, but enough to catch the attention of a local news anchor who loved HOA drama more than politics. The next day, I got a call. "Jules Harper?" the woman said. "I'm Grace Walton with Channel 4 Investigates. We're doing a piece on community disputes involving lakefront development. Your name came up." Of course it did. We met at my property 2 days later. I gave her a full walkthrough, carefully worded, nothing inflammatory, just facts. A decades-long ownership, a confirmed fraudulent attempt at land seizure, lawful sales and leases, nothing that screamed revenge. She took the footage, aired a segment titled "Small Town Attorney Pushes Back Against HOA Overreach," and lit a match under everything. The emails started pouring in, some from other landowners, some from HOA members who quietly supported what I was doing, and some most disturbingly from other victims of shoreline title holdings. Apparently, Crystal Shores wasn't the only HOA using Barry Lentz's services. There were 3 other communities with similar complaints: fraudulent transfers, shadow deeds, and sudden liens on land no one had agreed to sell. That changed everything. I called Taylor, told him to dig deeper. He didn't disappoint. Within a day, he found a trail of shady title activity, copy-paste documents with reused formatting, false notarizations, and bogus tax references. We flagged it all. Rebecca suggested filing a federal complaint, wire fraud, RICO considerations, the works. But first, I wanted one more chess move. I took out a full-page ad in the county paper. Just a simple quote, white text on black. If your mansion rests on stolen land, don't be surprised when someone knocks. JH. I didn't sign anything else. No company name, no contact info. Didn't have to. By the following morning, Meredith had left 3 voicemails. The tone had shifted. She didn't threaten. She didn't posture. She just said she wanted to meet. Off record. I didn't respond. Not yet. I didn't call Meredith back. Not because I didn't want to. There was a certain pleasure in hearing what kind of desperate offer she'd try to throw at me. But because I knew I had the upper hand now, and she knew it too. Radio silence is a powerful tool when you're dealing with people who only feel safe when they're in control. Let them stew. Let them imagine the worst. Let them whisper at their board meetings about what I might be planning next. I wasn't planning. I was executing. The day after the ad ran, we filed the federal complaint. Rebecca brought in a litigation specialist with experience in title fraud and financial racketeering. He was thrilled. These guys were sloppy, he said, flipping through the documents Taylor had compiled. I've seen amateur shell games and Florida retirement scams cleaner than this. The complaint named Shoreline Title Holdings, Crystal Shores HOA, and a handful of individuals directly involved in the forged transfers, including Barry Lentz. I knew it would take time to process, months, maybe longer, but the moment that complaint hit the federal docket, it became public. And when it went public, everything changed. Suddenly, neighbors stopped looking at me like I was the villain. They started looking at the board like maybe, just maybe, they weren't the benevolent protectors of lakeside serenity they pretended to be. One woman I barely knew, Cheryl from Lot 13, dropped off a pie at my gate with a handwritten note. Thank you for standing up to them. We always knew something felt wrong. That pie tasted better than any settlement offer I'd ever been given. Meanwhile, development on the eastern parcel continued. The tech retreat startup that had expressed interest earlier. They came back with a revised proposal and a larger offer. Their plan now included a wellness platform with meditation decks, a small boathouse for ecotourism, and a limited access trail into the woods. All of it respectful, clean, quiet. In short, everything the HOA claimed to value, just under my terms. I signed the deal. They broke ground the following week. The sound of earth-moving equipment drifting across the lake must have felt like cannon fire to the Crystal Shores elite. I made sure everything was done by code, with flags, fencing, permits posted on neat wooden stakes. I knew they'd try something. They did. A few days in, I got a visit from 2 sheriff's deputies. Got a call from the HOA, one said, not even bothering to hide his exasperation. Noise complaints, trespassing concerns, allegations of unsafe construction zones. You mind if we take a look? Of course not, I said, handing over the laminated permits. They took a stroll, chatted briefly with the foreman, and left with a shrug. One of them turned back and said, "Between you and me, half the county's rooting for you." That was the moment I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about me anymore. The HOA had overreached so far, so shamelessly, they'd alienated even their own members. And now they were watching their kingdom crumble one boat dock at a time. In a final attempt to throw a wrench into things, Halbrook filed a motion for an emergency injunction against the wellness project. His argument, that the construction posed a threat to the aesthetic harmony of the Crystal Shores community. The judge denied it in 5 minutes, cited my clear title, the legal precedents, and my cooperation with all permitting agencies. He even made a point of adding that subjective discomfort is not a valid legal basis for land restriction. I printed that quote out and taped it above my coffee maker. When Meredith finally called again, this time from a different number, I still didn't answer. Instead, I mailed her a copy of the complaint we'd filed against her board. No letter, no message, just a sticky note on the front that said, "You really should have knocked." The first homeowner cracked 3 days later. His name was Gregory Atwood, retired hedge fund manager, owner of the largest mansion on the Eastern Bank. The one with the 2-story dock and a wine cellar that probably cost more than the average starter home. I got a knock on my office door just after lunch, and there he was, standing like a man who'd been forced to swallow his pride, his watch, and half a bottle of Xanax. "I'd like to discuss options," he said. I didn't gloat, didn't even smile. I invited him in and let him talk. He explained in polite but clearly panicked tones that he'd just learned the parcel behind his home, the one I owned and now leased to the wellness startup, overlapped with part of his dock's foundation. Just 2 feet, but enough to matter, enough to make everything he'd built technically non-compliant. "I'm prepared to buy that sliver of land," he said, voice tight. "Name your price." I handed him a printed copy of the lease agreement the wellness group had signed. "I can't sell you what's already been leased," I said, "but I'd be happy to discuss a sublease, provided you're willing to work within the terms we've set." He stared at the document like it had just grown horns. "You want me to pay rent? To a meditation startup?" I shrugged. "Cheaper than rebuilding your dock." He left red in the face, but quiet. That was the real win. More homeowners started reaching out over the next week, some through lawyers, some directly. All of them asking some version of the same thing. How do we fix this without losing everything? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I waited for the board to make their move. They didn't disappoint. Halbrook filed an emergency appeal, not in local court this time, but in state court, hoping to challenge the legality of the original subdivision plan. It was a last-ditch move, relying on obscure land use definitions and an outdated environmental overlay that had been decommissioned 5 years ago. Rebecca and I showed up in court prepared. We brought maps, drone images, historical zoning records, even a county planning official willing to testify that Crystal Shores had never legally extended jurisdiction over the disputed land. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, tore their argument apart in less than 10 minutes. She even scolded Halbrook for wasting judicial resources. "This is not a playground for the wealthy to rewrite geography," she said. I liked her immediately. By the time we left the courtroom, it was over. The board had lost in municipal court. They'd lost in county court. Now they'd lost at the state level. All that was left was the fallout. And, oh, there was fallout. Within days, homeowners started turning on the board. Internal emails leaked. Meeting minutes appeared online. One homeowner published a scathing blog post accusing Meredith Walker and Barry Lentz of orchestrating an illegal land grab that jeopardized millions in property value. The real hammer fell when Barry was arrested, not by locals, by federal marshals. Fraud, conspiracy, wire misuse, falsification of property records. Turns out Shoreline Title Holdings had used the same tactics in at least 4 counties, and ours was just the loudest to push back. The news ran with it. Title Kingpin indicted in HOA scam. I watched it with popcorn. That weekend, I hosted a private event on the new Shoreline deck, just a small gathering. A few locals, some of the investors, a jazz trio. We drank wine, laughed. At one point, I saw Meredith driving slowly past the property, her face unreadable behind tinted windows. She didn't stop. I didn't wave. The verdict didn't arrive with a drum roll. It came in the even tone of a state judge who had long since run out of patience for theatrics. We stood in that crowded courtroom, board members in coordinated navy, my team in coffee-stained competence, while the judge read the findings as if reciting a grocery list. Fraudulent conveyance established. Abuse of process established. Tortious interference established. She affirmed the lower rulings, adopted the federal filings by reference, and then came the numbers. A compensatory award to me and Blue Ridge in the amount of $10,200,000, plus fees and costs. Civil penalties against Crystal Shores HOA and its affiliated shell actors totaling $5 million, the appointment of a compliance monitor, and the immediate suspension of the board pending a member vote on dissolution. Somewhere behind me, a pen clicked, then stopped. The room was very quiet. Outside, microphones bloomed like dandelions. I said very little. This had never been about a victory lap. It was about putting the map back where it belonged. Reporters asked if I felt vindicated. I told them I felt hungry. The camera lights faded, and I drove home on the back roads, letting the lake glitter through the trees the way it used to before the signs and the noise and the certainty that rich people have when they think a rule is just a suggestion. The money hit in waves. Escrow releases, cashier's checks, a wire that required a human being at the bank to actually look me in the eye and say, "Mr. Harper, please confirm the amount." I confirmed. Then I did the thing I'd promised myself the night I found those first red flags on my trail. I put a slab of it into the land itself. The old barn got a new roof. The gravel drive got packed and rolled. We cleared deadfall from the north trail and milled it into benches. And then we started on the classrooms. They weren't fancy. 2 converted outbuildings with honest floors and big windows that caught the lake light. We ran power, built shelves, filled them with maps and case files and a coffee pot that never slept. A friend who teaches civics came out on Saturdays and walked people through the skeleton of a deed, the arteries of a parcel map, the beating heart of a plat. A retired surveyor showed up with a tripod and a grin and took teenagers into the woods to show them how a boundary is not a fence line or a rumor, but a measured promise. I ordered a small brass plaque for the entry. It read exactly what I wanted it to read. No more, no less. Land is a right, not a privilege. Do not yield. Word got around. We called it the Land Rights Institute because that sounded like it could live longer than my temper. People drove in from a couple counties over. A rancher brought donuts and a story about a co-op that tried to lean his pasture because a board hated the color of his tractor. A retired librarian sat through 3 workshops and asked the best questions in the room. My kids came on Sundays rolling their eyes and then secretly beaming when a group of college students asked if they were the Harper crew. Across the lake, the vote happened. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. But the minutes are public, and later, someone slid a copy under my office door. Dissolution passed with a fat majority. The compliance monitor would unwind the finances, the members would contract for basic services without the HOA's ornamental tyranny, and the fountain that never worked would be auctioned to pay a sliver of the penalties. There was a footnote in the minutes expressing regret that misguided leadership invited unnecessary conflict. That's one way to put it. The wellness project opened quietly. No ribbon, just a slow morning and a dozen people learning to breathe without pushing the world around them. From the shore, the decks looked like they'd always been there. A blue heron stood in the shallows like he was auditing the permit, and finding it adequate, went back to being a blue heron. The electric boats hummed instead of roared. For the first time in a long time, the lake sounded like a lake. Meredith came alone, on foot, without the posture of a person who expects doors to open themselves. I saw her through the office window, hands empty, keys hooked on a single finger like she didn't trust them to stay. I met her on the porch. For a minute, we just stood with the smell of cut pine between us. I wanted to say it, she said, out loud to the person who paid for it most. I was wrong. I let the title work happen because it solved problems I didn't want to admit I'd made. I told myself we were protecting value. We were protecting comfort. We were protecting pride. The word burned on her tongue. I'm sorry. She looked smaller without the boardroom around her. Sorry is a cheap word in most mouths, but sometimes it lands like a weight. I thought about the survey tape and the phone calls and that laminated sign declaring my lake private for people who thought a shoreline was a mirror. I thought about the kids eating pancakes when the courier rang and about my father's old voice on a home recording, gruff and amused and certain. Your people voted, I said. You've got a chance to build something that doesn't need a gavel to stand up. Take it, she nodded. It wasn't absolution. It was a map out of the thicket. When she left, I walked the trail to the Institute and wiped a fleck of sawdust from the brass plaque. A boy was hunched over a map with the retired surveyor, arguing happily about bearings and trees. Someone had brought coffee, the good kind. On the far water, sunlight lay like a promise across the surface. I stood there longer than I meant to, and when I finally turned back toward the house, the wind moved through the pines in a way I recognized from childhood. A sound that said nothing fancy. Just here. Maybe that's the whole of it. You hold the line until the line holds you back. You learn the parts of a deed and the parts of yourself that won't sell. You teach what you had to learn the hard way, so maybe someone else won't have to. And when the doorbell rings again some future morning, you hope it's a neighbor with a question and not a courier with a stamp. If it's the stamp, we'll pour coffee. We have maps. We have time. We know the way.